here tonight. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing your time. So we have really great representation, and the behind the scenes sort of person pulling all the strings is Tara Raghavan, who is an incredible person and leader, a former president of SABA North America, and really the one that brought us all together. And she's done an incredible job of putting together a panel that has in-house government, big law, medium, small firm, and we really want to make this a really useful program for you guys. So to start, I wanted to share um, one of the polls that we did in our SAWAN group chat, and I wanted to show you guys the results of this poll, which is, we asked in our SAWAN group chat, which difficult conversations do you currently find most challenging? And overwhelmingly, the saying no or setting boundaries was the most popular sort of choice, is like, this is the hardest thing for us as female attorneys. Second, and tied together, was the asking for a promotion or raise or addressing biases or microaggressions. So I wanted to take a moment and ask our panelists, how have you guys addressed this? How have you set boundaries or said no, whether it's in your personal context or professional context? But I think for the purposes of this conversation, let's do professional first, and invite our panelists to answer. And I see Rena unmuted, so I'm going to go with you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nishi, and thanks for teeing up this really important conversation. I think, the process of becoming someone who is able to set and hold boundaries is an ongoing one. It certainly was for me. I think there are a couple of pieces of it that I'd like to talk through. The first of which is you're not always going to be liked by everyone, right? Like, I know that's obvious, but for me, as a people pleaser, as a person who kind of grew up, with our cultural dynamic, especially, being liked is really, and being a woman, being liked is really important. Sometimes when you say no, the other person may like you less, but I promise you, if you kind of drop that label of like the nice person, things will open up a little bit more in terms of, where you are, and you'll feel better. Kind of going along with feeling better, and maybe this is, a strange place to start, but I think it's really important to kind of like be a regulated person. Regulate your nervous system so that when you are like deciding to say yes or no to someone, to an opportunity, it's not just a reaction, kind of a reptilian reaction. It's really a thought through, decision that you're making that's informed. And then also important for setting boundaries is to understand what are your boundaries, right? So really like pausing and thinking through, for example, at some point I felt like I was on every board and every committee and every recruiting decision, like at, a firm I was at before. And I had to stop and say, no, I don't want to be on the hiring committee anymore. And part of that was analyzing all of these activities that I was doing and saying, well, for me, I've decided that my rule is going to be that I'm only going to participate in things that have two benefits to me. I really enjoy them, and it's going to have some sort of professional or personal benefit. And I looked at all those things and I decided this one doesn't. And so you have to then know your boundary, go say it. Don't fill the space after you say it. Don't, backtrack, and be okay with somebody being disappointed in you, which does happen.
I think that's great. You kind of like Marie Kondoed your extracurricular activities, which is fantastic. Like, does this bring me joy? Yes or
Yeah.
no? Diva, I know you had unmuted as well. Do you want to take a stab at this? How have you sort of set boundaries or said
Sure.
no?
Yeah. So just for context, I'll use an example. I became a new mom like 4 months before I became a new partner. And so I was going through both of those transitions at the same time and trying to navigate sort of what my boundaries would be in this world where my role was changing both internally and externally. And so the one thing I'd say is Tarina's point of being regulated. That is really important. And part of being regulated is also being self-aware. And so understanding what is your value, and where can you have that value add, but also what can you ask for in a realistic way. And I think that's where a lot of these conversations that feel uncomfortable or are difficult, where you're saying no, they're actually not that difficult once you understand what your value is, and you can sort of take a step back and be realistic about like what's actually needed of me here and what are people asking. And so one thing I did when I came back from my maternity leave was it was really important to me to have an hour in the morning and an hour and a half in the evening that I was not disrupted. And that I could spend time with my child. And it wouldn't happen every single day all the time, but that most days I wanted that respected. And I didn't want to have early evening calls just at those times. And I was really worried. And then I sat down and I just candidly assessed like, what do I actually need to be doing during those hours? And what am I missing? And what do those people need me for? And is there anything else that I can do? Can I keep my phone on in case there is an emergency? Can I um, say no in a way where I feel comfortable, but also where I'm acknowledging the actual value that I bring here? And so I agree with everything Rena said, and I would say all of that sort of comes from an underpinning of understanding who you are and what value you bring. And for a lot of people in this room, I think if you suffer from things like imposter syndrome, it can be really hard to have an accurate assessment of that value. So take a step back and talk to your mentors, because some of the concerns that you might have about saying no or setting boundaries, the thing that I heard afterwards from most of my colleagues was, I'm really glad that you said that before you came back from leave, because it actually encouraged me to send a similar email on some of my teams. And so it turned out not only were people not upset with me, and I was like worried about people pleasing for no reason, but it actually helped other people feel comfortable doing the same thing.
That's great. And thank you for sharing that example because I feel like that is so useful, especially for maybe those who are starting that path towards partnership and starting new families. It reminded me of the saying I've heard a lot, which is what you tolerate, you encourage. So if you
Mm.
tolerate kind of just like, yes, you can reach me at any time, I'm constantly available to you, then you're letting people kind of run all over you in that way too. So it was amazing that you were able to set boundaries. Jennifer, did you want to share?
Sure. Thanks, Nishi, and thanks everyone. I'm excited to be here. I agree with everything that Rena and Diva said. One thing that Rena said that I just wanted to underline is that being strategic about what it is that you're committing to and making sure it's something that's creating value for you as well. I think sometimes we may not always, recognize the value that we bring to the organization, whether it's work or something else. And something that I'm trying to do is making sure that whether it's something related to my work or professional development or parenting, it's something that is actually going to create value to my family, my career, my professional development long term. The other thing I want to share in the context of this panel is sometimes, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little later in the panel. For me personally, I think that's one of the stereotypes that we sometimes encounter is that of being sort of the more of the peacemaker, bringing people together, more of that collectivist, culture mentality. And for me personally, I've learned, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but to lean into that a little bit and to embrace that and to use that as a strength. But in this context, it can sometimes be a negative in that you can get, for me personally, there's been multiple times over the past 10 plus years where you get pulled into other people's fights too. And I think that is always something that's really key is to make sure that you're stepping back, understanding who are all the different players, what are their motivations. Don't jump, to volunteering to something. Don't jump to offering an opinion or a legal analysis on something. Taking that time to pause, listen, ask questions, maybe go around and have those meetings before the meeting to understand where the different stakeholders are, before you commit to something has been really helpful, to understand whether there is something that I need to involve myself in. Um, or if not, if it's something where I have to say no and I have to step in, knowing how to express that in a way that that preserves my relationship with folks there as well.
No, that makes sense, and I appreciate you sharing that. I like that idea of like leaning into the peacemaker and using your strengths as kind of the ways to combat some of the sort of expectations that you're seeing. Navdeep, what about you? How do you set boundaries or say no?
One of the things I've found really helpful is in the professional space, and this has been a muscle that I've had to kind of work out and practice and make stronger, has been almost modeling by example, whether it's to my direct reports or my manager. So in my last role, that was the first time I was on a large legal team in-house. Previously and currently, I've always been like a one-person legal team. So now I was in a team of 10 or 11, and my manager was going off on PTO. I think it was in my first couple months of the job. And he was like, I know you're still new here and you're still getting onboarded. Don't worry, I'll have my phone. And he was going to be like in Italy with his family or something like that. And the first thing I said to him was, we're fine. I'm prepared with, I'm on top of the stuff I need. Is there anything you need help with that's on fire while you're gone? If there's nothing on fire and you don't have the only fire extinguisher, don't worry about it. I will send things to your email so you can catch up easier when you're back. And he hadn't heard that before, and he was so appreciative. So it was when it was my time for PTO, I was able to prepare people and say, hey, heads up, I'm going to be going off in PTO in 2 weeks. What projects are hot? And with the buy-in from my manager, I was able to, in my away message, say, hey, I'm not accessible for these 2 weeks. If there is an emergency, and I bolded and highlighted and underlined emergency only, you can escalate to my manager. And then I also added a note that said, if it's not an emergency, it'll be held for my return. Because I needed to kind of manage expectations, especially in-house. Legal can often be like the de facto dumping ground for all things that people don't know where it goes. So we'll just send it to legal. And I did not want that to be the case. So part of my boundary setting has also include kind of like CBT with all of across all functions and helping kind of learn to have people learn how to manage expectations and what is an emergency and what isn't an emergency. And that helped me because I am a people pleaser and I'm a South Asian eldest daughter. And so my default is to do the thing and help and make things better. And in order to have my own breathing room, I needed to make sure that people knew how to give that to me. If they don't know what they don't know. Um, so they don't know that, yes, I actually, if I'm going to be off, I need to be off. And so that has been really helpful for me.
I love the out of office message example there. I'd seen actually in an opposing counsel one time, and I called him and I said, this is the best out of office I've ever seen. He like specifically put details of his trip, like, I am going to Alaska. I will be doing da 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 da. I would hope you don't, I wouldn't disturb you, so please don't disturb me. And like I like screenshotted it and saved it. I was like, this is the best out of office I've ever seen. And similarly, yours too, like the bold and circle and highlight emergency only and what is an emergency. And I like in your example, you were not only setting boundaries internally, but also externally. And I think that's super important. The second sort of tier that people seem to struggle with about the difficult conversations is asking for opportunities. And I wanted to first start with Diva and Rena from a firm perspective. It's hard a lot of times to when especially when expectations are unwritten and advancement isn't clearly defined. There's no handbook that says this is how you become partner or these are the 10 steps you need to do to get ahead. um Diva and Rena, if you guys don't mind sharing, like how were you guys able to achieve getting to the places you are, asking for opportunities, getting to your statuses within your respective firms without being labeled a firebrand? And Diva, if you want to start.
Sure. So, I'll start by saying it is a little easier for me because I am like a 95% extrovert. And so I want to acknowledge that sometimes that helps in these kinds of situations. Sometimes it hurts because part of that is people pleasing. But I think in terms of getting opportunities, I the fear sometimes is being seen as like too ambitious. To Tara's question, I don't think that there's anything wrong with being identified as a firebrand, and maybe that's also because I'm a trial litigator, and being a firebrand helps my own brand. But I think the fear that comes from like, if some people I think are worried, I'm going to be told I'm too ambitious, or I'm going to be seen as not ready. And now I've started a conversation at a time where now people are going to discuss why I'm not ready. The way that I both helped myself in that moment, but also helped the person who I was asking the opportunity or opportunity from, was naming it. And so Brene Brown says, name it to tame it. So I would walk into my mentor's office or the person who's supervising on a case and say, I'm really worried that if I ask for this, you might see me as too ambitious, but I also don't know how else to bring this up. And so naming it sort of diffused the entire, it actually kind of put the awareness on the table of that's actually not what I'm going for. And so we can just start from a different place. And like, I am ambitious. I do want this opportunity. I'm worried that it's going to be taken the wrong way. So I want to start off by saying that. And most of the time, just naming the concern meant that the conversation was easier to have. And so saying I'm having a difficult conversation is important. And to the other point of like asking for those opportunities, I actually made it a practice to never not ask. I always ask. I always ask because um, as long as it's something that is remotely within sort of the realm of possibility because you worked on the briefing or you worked on a particular issue and you think the client would be okay with it, um, ask because even if it doesn't help that time, there's only so many times people can say no to you before something has to shift, especially if you're self-aware and you know what your value is.
No, that's great. And it reminds me of this story. My dad told me when I got my first job out of college and I was like not wanting to negotiate the salary because I was like, oh, I don't want to be seen as difficult. And he was like, you can ask and they can say no. That's the worst they're going to do. They're not going to pull the whole offer. But we have that fear that we have to conquer. And I appreciate you saying like naming it. Rena, did you want to talk about too kind of this concept of labels and how that plays into this?
Yeah, no, actually, I'm a big book reader, and so I'll probably mention a couple of books on this panel. But and I won't say the full name just to keep it PC, but the name of the book is The Subtle Art of Not Giving Enough. Um, and it's a great book, gives a really interesting perspective on that sometimes our struggle with like engaging in the world is the fact that we have labeled ourselves in a certain way. And when we've labeled ourselves in a certain way, if any behavior is going to be opposed to that label, then it causes all this strife. And so I think that really, doing and Diva talked about, knowing yourself, and I think that that's really important to say, hey, we're not just this like list of labels. We're really nuanced people, right? And kind of think about it in terms of like, okay, well, like we talked about kindness, before. Well, I'm a kind person, but I'm also a kind person to myself. And what does that mean? And is somebody who's kind 75% of the time still a kind person? You can be that. But I think by dropping those kind of, wanting to be seen in a certain way, you really open up your ability to be able to have more authentic reactions to things, more authentic conversations with people. And then I think building those relationships is where you can, if you come to someone in a very genuine way to ask for something that's like in line with how you are, it's not going to be taken wrong because they know you, right? And they're not coming at it with, such distance.
I think that's great. And I particularly like this idea of like not letting these labels define you and kind of breaking through the stereotypes. We had another question in the chat, but what I wanted to actually, this question is perfect for our first live audience poll. So I'm gonna kind of wait for Latika to see if she can help me with the first poll that we want to. Oh, there we go. Okay. Hopefully everyone has gotten this pop up, which is, we're talking about this idea of speaking up and we're talking about this idea of asking for opportunities, but there's also this fear of speaking up and what is it that stops people from speaking up? So I'm gonna give a couple seconds here for people to I really like this. I've never done this before. This is exciting. Like this is why they don't put me in front of tech because I'm just amazed by it, to be honest. Okay, so we're getting some kind of interesting responses here. Um, and it seems like it's all over the board. Unlike our first poll, which was like fairly clear, we've kind of gotten a whole mixed bag of issues here of what stops people from speaking up. Um, so maybe what I'll do is Jennifer and Navdeep, I'll kind of turn to you guys here. Um, and from you guys, like your perspective, when you have these fears in the back of your mind, the fear of retaliation, for example, and that was one of the questions in the chat.
Mhm.
Kind of this, and Jennifer, I think you talked about this in the beginning about, we get labeled as being a peacemaker, but I'm okay with that. Like kind of the cultural perspectives, negative experiences, not wanting to be difficult. How do you kind of manage that, especially in your perspective from the government point of view, where you have sort of like rigid hierarchies and public accountability? Like how do you speak up when you're dealing with it in this kind of context?
Yeah, I think well, first, I think the label thing is interesting. I think, people are going to label you no matter what, whether you're South Asian, whether you're white, whatever you are, right? And so I think there's some power in understanding where that's coming from and then either redefining that for yourself or, like Rena said, rejecting that and saying that's not who I am and we're not a monolith, right? We all have very diverse talents and backgrounds and experiences. Um, and I think for me personally, I'm also the oldest in my family. And so I think there's some common experiences and character qualities that often come along with that. And I've had to learn to adjust what that means and redefine what that means for me as an attorney and as a government attorney. I think one thing that's been really important is we have to understand, for me personally, in public sector and working for a government entity is understanding what our role is. And there's a lot of power in understanding, for me, I'm not the policy decision maker. I'm not the person who's going to, make those decisions. My job is to make sure that I'm providing accurate, sound legal research, legal advice, guidance, and understanding what the client wants. And then being able to give options, being able to provide guidance. And for what I've tried to lean into is making sure that I'm building that reputation, that when I give you advice, when I tell you something is risk, more of a risk than another option, that I have that trust built that people understand where I'm coming from and understand that it is something that they can rely on. And that takes time to build. The other thing that I wanted to say with what keeps us sometimes from speaking up, drawing that boundary, what are the fears? For me, it definitely was, and I took the poll. For me, it was definitely that cultural background. And I just was brought up that way. And so there's multiple times I'm sure we can all relate where early in my career or even in law school, something happened and I just didn't speak up. I literally didn't have the words or the training to know what to say, because that wasn't something that was cultivated in me. And so I had to teach that to myself. And there was, an experience that I had where I had to, it was soon after I had a child and I was only a few months postpartum and coming back to work and it was post-COVID. And I really think it was folks um, setting a label on me and then taking advantage of the fact that I'd been out for a long time. And I had to, without getting into details, come back into the office, advocate for myself, make sure that I knew who it was that I had to address. I had to confront them, but I did it in my own way. I did it in my way. You have to sort of sift through all of those different factors, whether it's the authority figure, knowing what it is that's going to motivate them, knowing how to address whatever it is that happened in a clear way, in a way that's not emotional, in a way that is um, where you're presenting that executive and professional presence. You're in control. You're not someone that's coming into this with that high anxiety because you didn't do anything wrong. And that goes back to Rena's point about self-regulating too, right? And that took a lot of preparation. I did talk to some folks for some advice, but really it had to come from me. It had to come from me sitting down with myself, thinking through, What are the factors at play here? What are the motivations at play here? And how do I speak to those in authority in a way that appeals to what their goals are, right? And that's really for me been the way to make sure that you're still getting what you want and what you deserve, um, with the long game, I guess, in your mind, right? So those are some things that came to mind.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, and you've mentioned this in the beginning too, but I want you to expand on it, which is this idea of practicing these conversations, right? I think you said earlier in your remarks like it's a muscle, and you gotta flex that muscle, right? You work out the rest of your body, but like this is
Mhm.
not something you can just do. You can't be spontaneous. Can you maybe help shed some light on how you've been able to ask for opportunities, especially in the in-house context where I know you mentioned your manager earlier, but sometimes like that authority shift is hard to figure out. Um, and also like if you can give an example or maybe some, coaching tips for those watching this today, like when we finally reach this higher ladder, like how can we be the ones to say no sometimes?
Sure, absolutely. So when I filled out the survey, my answer to the first question was other, because my biggest detractor from in the past has been this is going to be a waste of energy. It's falling on deaf ears. What is the point of me asking? Because this person has shown that they do not listen to my needs. And a lot of times that's both professional and personal. And at least in the professional space, I've kind of, and it sounds very silly, but I've kind of set the bar for myself like, if I ask this person for this opportunity, if I bring up this tough thing that I want to address, will I die? Okay, if I'm not going to die, I can do that. And if it falls on deaf ears, as an attorney, at least, I want to have set the record that I asked. I want to set the record that I brought it up to them that this made me uncomfortable or that I disagree with this decision. And if the person is in a place of more authority and they're overriding what I'm saying, I want to know that I've at least put it on the record that, listen, this is, I disagree with this approach. Uh, you're you're the boss. So if it's your decision, great. If it's my decision, I'm telling you that I prefer this. Um, and having some of those low stakes conversations that made me uncomfortable really helped me flex that muscle. Where I was talking about going to a conference, whether or not there was budget, talking about presenting where it might not have occurred to them to have me present or to have legal involved in a conversation. Or there are instances where somebody said, oh, I'm going to be talking to this customer and we're going to be talking about this sales agreement that we're working on it. And me just speaking up and saying, hey, you know what? I think I'd like to be on that call and just add me. And part of it is, also a lot of us dealing with imposter syndrome in varying degrees is the aspect of faking it till you make it. Because when you are legal, there is a certain air of authority. And so sometimes you just have to walk as if you already have it. Um, and people don't know, right? If people come and talk to you and say, should we do this? And you get to say yes or no. And so how you address them, and in instances where you brought up Nishi, like having to say no, those are opportunities, I think, like Jennifer mentioned, establishing trust. Those are great opportunities to establish trust. So when you say yes, they take you seriously, and when you say no, they take you seriously, and that they weigh your opinion. They give a lot of weight to your opinion, and that's been really important. One of the things that I've really operated from is a place of, if anybody's done improv, and the rule number one of improv is yes and I always try to operate from a place of yes if. So when I'm talking, whether it's across functions, whether it's to my own legal team, saying yes, we can do almost anything you want if we address X, Y, and Z, and if we do that, then yes, we can do this. If you're willing to tolerate the risk, if you can get the buy-in from this higher up person, if we have the budget for it, if this will not cost more in PR risk, then it's worth it to us. That has also really helped me have those more difficult conversations or ask for what I want and approaching things from like almost a cost benefit analysis. That's kind of really strengthened my position because then I feel prepared. So I don't feel like I have to be doing things off the cuff. And that has helped me flex that muscle a lot more.
And I think that especially that last point that you made is so important because I think oftentimes we seek to be the people who have all the answers in the moment, in the exact moment that people are asking us,
Yep.
forgetting that we can easily say like yes and or yes if da 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 da, and we need to take a second to analyze all these 55 things that have come up, right? Like we do analysis is for our clients, for internal risk analysis is all the time, but we don't do it for ourselves in like these moments. So I think especially using that cost benefit analysis or the yes if um uh, example was great. Rena and Diva, I want to get you guys in on this conversation too, especially on the point of retaliation, because I feel like this is such a hot topic for us. And a lot of us face this is when we ask for opportunities, like what's going to happen to me. I don't know if either one of you have examples you want to share or talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the that fear is definitely there. So I appreciate Navdeep, you bringing that up because I think what's going to happen and the catastrophic thinking and being able to run that down is a really important piece of it. I've definitely had that where I've asked for top opportunities to be on particular cases and was told no, was asked, asked for, particular roles, was told no. I think maybe it's helpful to just say that also in this venue. I've heard no, right? I bet you everybody here has heard no. We all survived. We all lived. We all have gone on to thrive and have other opportunities. I think it's really about um, moving in the face of fear. And so one of the articles that I really loved out there is Asif Mandvi has an article that says that the title is Everything I've Ever Done Has Scared Me, right? And so this idea of like just because there's a downside or a scary thing about it doesn't mean you don't go forward and kind of building that confidence of being able to say, okay, well, if it doesn't work out here and it's somehow there is retaliation, I can pick up and go somewhere else. And I have had that experience where I've realized, oh, this environment does not support me. And if it is an environment where asking for an opportunity will result in retaliation, I do need to think about where else can I go?
And I think that's such a good point. Diva, did you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I'll give an example. So all throughout my practice, but ever since I graduated law school, I've been a part of this organization that speaks up against harassment and employment misconduct in the federal judiciary because employees of the federal judiciary aren't covered by a lot of employment laws, which I can get into later. But that has been a really scary thing to do because it's an institution that I practice within almost entirely. And it's really hard. As a law clerk, I worried about retaliation. As somebody who practices in front of the federal courts, I worry about retaliation. But there are a few things that I think really help when it comes down to like how to have those conversations, but also feel less worried. First is finding your people. So you don't have to do these types of things alone. If you're seeing something or there are issues, I'm not saying go out and always trust HR. HR is not always on your side. So, but find your people, whether that's at the company that you're working with or the institution you're within or outside of it. Be clear about the message that you want to convey. For me, it was I'm not actually questioning this institution or bad mouthing the federal judiciary. I just want to make it better. And if I could stick to that message, it made having the difficult conversation a lot easier. Be purposeful and strategic. So, like, who are you talking to about these issues? Who are you having the difficult conversation with, and when? And then also just be clear about your values. So, to what Rena said, at some point, it's important to sort of think about what those values are before you're in the difficult conversation or the situation, if you can, so that if an issue arises and you're like, this is not right for me, you know what your values are and you're not worried about sort of retaliation as a reason to not speak up in a particular instance.
No, great examples. And thank you so much. And I think what's really helpful at least for me, like, and this has been great for me. I don't know about the other 72 people on here, but like it's been fantastic for me. But I really like these examples and these use cases because it's like everything you guys are saying, I'm like, oh yeah, and that reminds me of, and I'm hopeful that's true for our audience here today too. Um, One of the things that we face though, particularly as South Asian women, is we face microaggressions, bias in a lot of different ways. We face it internally in the companies and firms and organizations that we're part of. We face it externally, and I think there's a question in the chat about opposing counsel. How do you get opposing counsel to take you seriously as a woman of color? Um, and I've seen it with judges, like, oh, are you the paralegal? Like, and we face this all the time. And I think the question that comes up is how do you decide when you're addressing that microaggression or bias? Like, are you doing it in the moment? Are you doing it later? Are you doing it not at all and figuring out a different, way to handle it? I'd love to hear from the whole panel on this, and happy for anyone to start who feels comfortable doing so.
You can start us off. I think definitely it's a balancing act for me personally. So sometimes you're going to want to address it right away in that moment with a very direct email, and I think you should do that. But I have found with the people that are like that, the thing that really makes it change is proving them wrong and doing the work to show yourself as that expert. Whether it's, I think it was funny hearing you mention the judge thinking you're the paralegal. I think we've all had that experience, probably. Everyone has litigated or showing up to a deposition and the opposing counsel thinks you're the court reporter, right? So again, I try to flip it to say, how can I use this to my advantage? And how can I use being um, um, kind of disregarded or not under what's what I'm looking for here, but not not seen for what you can do. How can you use that to your advantage, right? And so for me, it was I came over prepared early on to those like court um, um, conferences or to the deposition. I made sure I was showing that you cannot underestimate me. That's what I was looking for. Underestimate me because I'm going to be able to show you that I'm either just as good as you or better because I'm actually taking that time to know the case backwards and forwards and some of those skills that a lot of us have probably learned, whether it's through trauma, family trauma, or something else, in terms of being able to read the room, having that soft skills, having that emotional intelligence, that can really help you a lot when it comes to, those depositions, and getting some testimony out of the other party that someone else might not be able to, right? And so, it's a balance between making sure that you are standing up for yourself, making sure that you are advocating for yourself and being strategic about that and not letting that person's view of yourself, impact how you see yourself too.
No, for sure.
I'll chime in as well. One of the things I have a couple of, I don't want to call them moves, but kind of go-to responses when I sense that somebody is either purposefully uh, executing a microaggression or if they just don't know better. And sometimes sensing that helps. Um, but really, one of the things that I found most powerful is to just kind of stop acknowledging subtext. And I say that to mean I'm absolutely dumb. I do not know what you're talking about. Um, so no, somebody says you're the paralegal. No, I'm not. Okay, who are you? Yeah, I'm the attorney. And I kind of give them nothing in response. Um, and I hold firm. So like my name for Punjabis is a very unisex name. Men or women can have it, non-binary folks can have it. So a lot of times over email, I will get misgendered very regularly. And when I was a baby attorney, I used to start out by, oh, hey, by the way, smiley emoji. I'm actually a Ms. I'm not a Mr. And then I tried to add it to my signature, in the hopes that they would see, oh, Ms. Navdeep Tucker. And then eventually at a certain point, I just stopped caring. And I was like, they did not even ask. Like if they called the office, they assumed that I was the secretary. When they emailed, they assumed that if they're emailing with the attorney, I must be male. So I'm also just not going to care now. So when I respond, I would just without smile purposefully without smileys and without sorries or pleases, just saying I'm a Ms., not a Mister, and leave it at that. And most of the time, calling them out, not in a way that is aggressive, but just calling them out very simply and directly has been helpful because people don't usually do that with them. Or in an instance where I had a new job and somebody asked, I have two very quick examples. One, I was at this place for I had been there maybe a month or two, so I had not built up the street cred with anybody, but somebody did the, oh, where are you from? No, where are you really from? Because my last name also confuses a lot of people. Um, and so at a certain point it clicked, and I was like, are you asking me why I'm not white? And they had not occurred to them before. And they're like, I guess that is what I'm asking you. And they're like, all right, well, never mind. I said, okay, great. Because they hadn't learned the nuance of, as we got to know each other better, it's like, you can ask me about my ethnicity or my background. So, but when you're telling me where I'm really from, what you're really asking me is why I'm not white. And they hadn't heard it that way before. And another kind of similar example,
You have more stuff?
oh, just somebody
Sorry,
not
we'll
mute.
mute.
Another similar examples, I was like just out of college. I was working an executive assistant job. Again, no authority, no power. And 6 months into this job, where I had been working with a few execs very closely, one of my execs, when nobody else was around, walked up to me and was like, hey, is there something shorter that I can call you? And I have a family nickname, but I don't use it in the professional space. And I'm comfortable with both, but in the professional space, I just don't give them the option. I make them learn my name, Navdeep. And I don't know where the sassiness came from. I don't necessarily recommend doing that, but I said, well, are two syllables getting to be a bit much for you? And he was like, oh, and then he left. And of course, he didn't like me, but I was only there another few months. Um, but it was that instance where I felt like, again, they don't know how to treat me unless I tell them. And if I say, well, no, you can't say my name a weird way, or you can't say my name shortly. If you don't know how to pronounce it and you're in as a well-intentioned person asking me, happy to help. Um, but if you're just saying it because it's uncomfortable for you to say Navdeep when you're used to saying Matt and Jim and Bill, I'm not gonna help you there. It's not my job to coddle you. It's not my job to help you. My job is I'm here as your attorney. So now you have to deal with your own discomfort. Because I think as South Asian women, we're also really socialized to make everybody around us as comfortable as possible. And so that's kind of part of the uh, kind of coming into my own. And maybe it's because I'm in my 40s, also just caring less. I feel like I'm not really worried about making you comfortable. That's not in my job description.
I, I
Um,
don't, I don't know if you've seen all the like different hand claps and smiley faces. Like you
yes.
got a lot of people who've been like supporting exactly what you said. So that's amazing. Anyone else have examples they want to share or stories kind of like this of how they've addressed these biases or microaggressions?
Yeah, I wanted to just respond to I do exactly what Navdeep says of like kind of being like not allowing the subtext to exist. So some of my go-to phrases I think someone asked in the chat are is there a reason? Like, is there a reason you keep leaving me off of emails to opposing, like I'll just ask opposing counsel. And usually there's not a good reason they want to put in writing, and so that's that. Or if it's, I don't understand the joke. Or just like in any instance, kind of asking for that one step beyond can really make people pause. So force the pause if it doesn't already exist. But the other thing is just thinking about who is being impacted. So before you sort of speak up, like if it's about a microaggression to someone else, I sometimes pause there, and before speaking up, I kind of have a side conversation with that person. So I think when you're having these difficult conversations, it's important to remember who else is being impacted. And then finally, I think there was just a point in the chat that I wanted to talk about. Ranjani said, it's really hard. How do you keep the confidence to be prepared for like waves or moves when your plate is already so full? And I think a lot of people in this chat can probably relate to that, because we're all carrying a lot of weight from different parts of our life, and saying like I'm going to leave if it's not right doesn't always work. One thing that I think I always focus on is like I am really good at being uncomfortable, is what I've realized. I've spent a lifetime being in rooms that I am uncomfortable in. And so it's the one thing that I know I'm good at. And so I have to keep just reminding myself when I get in these situations of like, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? And even in that situation, I think I'm really, really good at being uncomfortable. And I've had to start over or find new ways to do things. I'm like a first gen person who's made it this far. I'm going to figure it out. And so reminding yourself of like all the times that you figured something else like that out is a really important thing when you're getting ready to have these conversations.
Sorry, I was muted. Rena?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, I mean, so many great stories and points. So, but wanted to pick up on the point that Diva just mentioned about kind of understanding the context if something happens and really like looking at it. So, if somebody makes a comment, when in our prep call, I talked about an experience where at a pitch meeting, um, it was a large group that was going to be on site at a client, and men and women there, mostly men but a few women, and we were going to give some kind of swag from the firm, and the marketing person that was helping us coordinate everything emailed me and the other female partner and said, hey, when you get there, could you like just make sure everything looks nice, like the swag, and so I obviously don't want to go in there with that role, and also wanted to be sensitive to the fact that she's just, first of all, I would never want that job to manage all these lawyers. What a pain in the butt, so and I knew her personally also, and so and she's supporting, she's a support staff for us, so really kind of like figuring out, okay, well, how do you address this. And I gave her a call and said, hey, listen, I noticed that you just, messaged the two female shareholders. Could you just actually reply all to everybody and ask them, ask everybody to do it? And for sure, if it needs to be done, I'm sure I'll end up stepping up. But at the same time, let's make sure to put that on everybody else's plate. And so I think understanding and really trying to understand the dynamics and thinking about that is really important. The other point I wanted to make is that, um, you know, everybody has their own personalities and ways of doing things. And so you have to kind of figure out what's right for you. And so I love, Navdeep, you're a badass. I would, yeah, I don't have that particular piece, but I do things like sort of in a way that kind of works with my personality and the way that I talk. And so, it's not a one size fits all. And so I do like coming up in advance with some phrases and ways to deal with things, and along the lines of what Diva said, kind of being curious about, wait, what did you sorry, what did you just say? I didn't understand. Why did you, what do you mean? I'm trying to understand. And that does work for me, and I feel like that works in a lot of different situations. But you have to, or maybe use humor or something like that, but figure out what works for you personally, and then use that.
Thank you guys. Well, and on that last point too, Rena, about using humor, like I do it a lot. Like I use humor to self-deprecate a lot, and that's kind of like my personality. And for anyone who's heard me speak, like that's something I do. But I was really inspired last year, especially with our SAWAN group and Churan Sandhu leading the way. And we were on a Zoom call, and she had asked all of us, all of the female attorneys on that call, to say like, my name is, and then one really incredible thing about ourselves, right? Like, and say it with like big confidence, like I am a badass, like to Rena's point about Navdeep, and this is what I do, and I'm not apologizing for it. I'm not saying, oh, sorry, I'm also here, or I just happen to be. So I had challenged our panelists before today's call in our prep session. I'd said, look, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put you guys on the spot. I'm going to make you do this. Because I also think if everyone here on this call sees people doing this, you will be empowered to do it. So I'd like for each of our panelists to give kind of their one line, their tagline. I know I introduced at the very beginning of the call, but just is like a one takeaway for our audience, and Rena, I'll start with you if you don't mind. If you want to say your name and then like your tagline, like I am whatever, and please.
Hello, of course, I couldn't find the button to go off of mute. Hi, everyone. I'm Rena, and I can solve the most complicated problems and make them really easy for you.
Awesome. I'm gonna call you tomorrow to help me with something. Diva, do you want to go?
Hi, I'm Diva, and I am really good at pretending I'm not scared and standing up for the values that I believe in.
Amazing. Navdeep, I feel like we all know what you're gonna say, but you're probably
Well,
gonna surprise us.
I was going to preface it with I really appreciate being called a badass because I do not feel that way most of the time. So my tagline is my name is Navdeep and I am stronger than I realize.
Awesome.
Because often when I say these things, I'm surprising myself.
Fantastic. Jennifer?
Okay, my name is Jennifer, and I'm not afraid to say what I believe is the truth and what to do what my job is.
Look at all these incredible women we have on here. Like, thank you guys so much for being part of this panel. I'm gonna kind of quickly scroll through, and I think we've answered most of the questions. There is one question, Joe, from Charu that I'd like for our panelists in the last couple minutes to answer because I think it's probably something a lot of people have experienced. So I'll read it out, and then whoever wants to take it. Looking for suggestions on what to say when I make a point, get negative commentary or silence in response, and then a male partner makes the same point, sometimes even crediting me, which then triggers positive commentary and adoption from the group of mostly male partners. Like, what would people do in this situation?
If I didn't feel like I could address it in that moment, because there are times when you can and sometimes when you can't. Sometimes I approach things from a way of curiosity. Again, I'm not assuming subtext. So I might go to my manager afterwards and say, hey, I've observed, not being emotional, but I've observed that this has happened, XYZ has happened on a number of occasions. Is it a communication gap? Because I'm trying to understand how me and Joe are saying the same thing and it's being received very differently. So you tell me as my manager, or you tell me as the person giving feedback, what's the issue? Because then again, we're talking about establishing a record, then I can make a record that I've asked the question and you've told me there's no problem, right? Or you've told me that, well, yeah, maybe Joe, Joe says things really funny and you don't, you're bored, you're bored, whatever the feedback is. Um, because then either it might be actual substantive helpful feedback, or if it's BS feedback, then I can also maintain my record as an employee of the company that yes, I've brought this issue to them. And if I ever need to establish a record, then I've established a record of having asked and not saying and not complaining or not be giving them an opportunity to be like, oh my God, she's so emotional. She's just crying about her idea not being heard. More so being like, no, actually, I gave you valuable ideas. And I know they were valuable because you accepted them when Joe told you. And I've asked how to, where the gap is, and you told me there was no gap. So I like the long view as well. Is that if either there's going to be a positive result in the short term or in the long term for me.
Awesome. Anyone else? Okay. Hey, real quick, Latika, can we put that final poll up? I think some people started to answer it when we were doing the other poll. But I'm really curious what people's takeaways from today's conversation is. Like I said at the beginning, we wanted this to be a practical, hands-on thing. And so if you scroll down to the second question, not the first question, but the second question, after today's panel, what is one action you feel more equipped to take? We really hope, it's one thing to speak up, and I think people misconstrue speaking up with volume or being loud, but it's standing firm. It's standing your ground. And I think as our amazing panelists have shown today, that's really what it is in your own way, in the way that you feel most comfortable doing it, practicing it. Maybe it's in front of a mirror and practicing it. But it looks like a lot of our audience is more prepared to have an intentional, tough discussion. And I think that's great. That's exactly what we want, to set clearer boundaries. Great. And addressing bias sooner rather than later. So thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. Thank you guys for sharing your time, but your experiences, knowledge, value, and advice. I know I found it immensely useful. And it seems like we've gotten great feedback here in the panel as well. I'm gonna have to learn how to do all the reactions like that. Those are cool. And I appreciate you all being here. If you haven't joined the SABA North America or SAWAN WhatsApp groups, I encourage you to do so. There's a lot of great information in either one. You can find them on our website, sabanorthamerica.com. Thank you guys so much. Have a great evening.
Thanks for moderating, Nishi.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was
Thanks,
great.
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you.